Welcome back to Top 10 Magazine. In this video, we're going to explore some of the most notorious killer couples in history. Number 1. Bonnie and Clyde. Bonnie Parker and Clyde Barrow were an American criminal couple who gained notoriety during the Great Depression for their string of robberies and murders across the central United States. They were active from 1932 to 1934 and are believed to have killed at least 9 police officers and several civilians. Bonnie and Clyde became popular figures in the media, with newspapers reporting on their exploits and even publishing photos of them. However, they were eventually ambushed and killed by law enforcement in Louisiana in 1934. Despite their violent actions, they have been romanticized in popular culture, with numerous books, films, and songs written about them over the years. Number 2. Fred and Rose West. Fred and Rosemary Rose West were a British couple who were responsible for the torture, rape, and murder of at least 12 young women and girls, including some of their own children. The crimes took place between 1967 and 1987, primarily at the couple's home in Gloucester, England. Fred had a history of sexual abuse and violence towards women, and Rose was his accomplice in many of the crimes. The couple would lure young women to their home with promises of employment, and then subject them to brutal sexual abuse and torture before killing them. Some of the victims were buried in the garden of the West's home. Fred and Rose were eventually caught in 1994, after one of their daughters informed the police about the abuse she had suffered at their hands. Both were charged and found guilty of multiple counts of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment. Fred committed suicide in his cell in 1995, while Rose remains in prison. Number 3. Paul Bernardo and Karla Homolka. Paul Bernardo and Karla Homolka were a Canadian couple who were responsible for the sexual assault and murder of several young girls, including Homolka's own sister. The crimes took place between 1987 and 1992 in Ontario, Canada. Bernardo was a serial rapist who met Homolka in 1987. The couple's crimes began with the rape and murder of Homolka's 15-year-old sister, Tammy. They then went on to abduct, sexually assault, and murder 2 other young girls. The couple videotaped many of their crimes and would later use the tapes as a form of pornography. Homolka was eventually able to strike a plea deal with prosecutors, testifying against Bernardo in exchange for a reduced sentence. Bernardo was convicted of multiple counts of murder and sexual assault and was sentenced to life in prison. Homolka served 12 years in prison for her role in the crimes and was released in 2005. The case remains one of the most high-profile criminal trials in Canadian history. Number 4. Ian Brady and Myra Hindley. Ian Brady and Myra Hindley were a British couple who were responsible for the abduction, torture, and murder of 5 young children in the 1960s. The crimes took place primarily in the Greater Manchester area of England. Brady and Hindley were in a relationship and shared a fascination with violence and death. They abducted their victims, sexually assaulted them, and then murdered them. The bodies of 4 of the children were found buried on Saddleworth Moor, while the body of the 5th child has never been found. The couple was eventually caught and charged with multiple counts of murder. Brady was sentenced to life in prison and died in 2017, while Hindley was also sentenced to life imprisonment but was released on parole in 2002. The case remains one of the most notorious criminal cases in British history, with the brutal nature of the crimes and the callousness of the couple shocking the nation. Number 5. Raymond Fernandez and Martha Beck. Raymond Fernandez and Martha Beck were an American couple who became known as the Lonely Hearts Killers for their crimes in the 1940s. The couple met through a classified advertisement in a Lonely Hearts magazine and began a relationship based on fraud and deception. Fernandez and Beck would prey on lonely, middle-aged women, promising them love and marriage before ultimately stealing their money and valuables. When the women became too much of a burden or stood in the way of the couple's scheme, they would be killed. The couple was eventually caught in 1949 after killing at least 20 people across several states. They were convicted of multiple counts of murder and sentenced to death. Fernandez was executed in 1951, while Beck's sentence was commuted to life in prison due to her gender. She died in prison in 1954. The case inspired several films and books, including the 2006 film Lonely Hearts starring John Travolta and Salma Hayek.
Don't forget to like and share this video if you enjoyed it, and subscribe to our channel for more top 10 videos like this one.
Number 6. Gerald and Charlene Gallego. Gerald and Charlene Gallego were an American couple who were responsible for the sexual assault, torture, and murder of at least 10 young women in California and Nevada during the late 1970s. Gerald was a convicted rapist and Charlene was his girlfriend, who became his accomplice in the crimes. The couple would abduct young women, sexually assault them, and then murder them before dumping their bodies in remote areas. Their killing spree was brought to an end in 1980 when a victim managed to escape and alert the police. Both were arrested and eventually convicted of multiple counts of murder and sexual assault. Gerald was sentenced to death and was executed in 2002, while Charlene received a sentence of 16 years to life in prison and remains incarcerated. The Gallegos' crimes shocked the communities in which they occurred and led to increased awareness and concern about serial killers and sexual predators. Number 7. David and Catherine Birnie. David and Catherine Birnie were an Australian couple who were responsible for the abduction, sexual assault, and murder of 4 young women in the 1980s. David was a violent and abusive man who had a history of sexual assault and violence towards women. Catherine was his accomplice in the crimes, luring victims to their home with promises of work or shelter before David would attack and sexually assault them. The couple would keep their victims captive for several days, subjecting them to horrific acts of violence before ultimately killing them. They would then bury the bodies in shallow graves. Their crimes were eventually discovered in 1986 when a victim managed to escape and alert the police. Both were arrested and found guilty of multiple counts of murder and sexual assault. David was sentenced to life imprisonment and died in prison in 2005, while Catherine was sentenced to life imprisonment and remains incarcerated. The Birnie's crimes shocked the Australian public and led to increased awareness and concern about serial killers and sexual predators in the country. Number 8. Doug Clark and Carol Bundy. Doug Clark and Carol Bundy were an American couple who were responsible for the abduction, sexual assault, and murder of at least 6 young women in California during the early 1980s. Clark was a career criminal and Bundy was his girlfriend, who became his accomplice in the crimes. The couple would lure young women into their car, sexually assault them, and then murder them before dumping their bodies in remote areas. Their killing spree was brought to an end in 1980 when Clark was arrested on suspicion of a separate crime and Bundy was subsequently arrested as his accomplice. Both were eventually convicted of multiple counts of murder and sexual assault. Clark was sentenced to death and remains on death row, while Bundy was sentenced to life in prison and died in prison in 2003. The Clark and Bundy case received widespread media attention at the time, with the brutality of the crimes and the involvement of a female accomplice shocking the public. Number 9. Jeremy Steinke and Jasmine Richardson. Jeremy Steinke and Jasmine Richardson were a Canadian couple who were responsible for the murder of Richardson's family in 2006, when she was just 12 years old, and Steinke was 23 years old. Richardson and Steinke met at a punk rock concert and developed a relationship based on their shared fascination with violence and death. When Richardson's parents objected to the relationship, the couple planned and carried out the murders of Richardson's parents and younger brother. The couple fled the scene and were later found by police, with Steinke attempting to disguise himself by shaving his head. Both were charged with multiple counts of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment, with Richardson being the youngest person ever convicted of multiple murders in Canadian history. The case shocked the nation and sparked debate about the influence of violent media and the responsibility of parents in monitoring their children's online activities. Number 10. Alvin and Judith Neelley. Alvin and Judith Neelley were an American couple who were responsible for the abduction, rape, and murder of at least 3 young women in Georgia and Alabama during the 1980s. Alvin was a convicted rapist and Judith was his girlfriend, who became his accomplice in the crimes. The couple would abduct young women, sexually assault them, and then murder them before dumping their bodies in remote areas. Their killing spree was brought to an end in 1982 when they were arrested in Georgia, but they managed to escape custody and continued their crimes in Alabama. They were eventually caught again and found guilty of multiple counts of murder and sexual assault. Alvin was sentenced to death and was executed in 2005, while Judith received a sentence of life imprisonment without parole. Judith was also later convicted of the murder of a teenage girl in 1982 and was sentenced to death, but her sentence was later commuted to life in prison without parole. The Neelley's crimes shocked the communities in which they occurred and led to increased awareness and concern about serial killers and sexual predators in the United States.
Want to see more top 10 videos like this one? Subscribe now and join our community.